Welcome to Brief Encounters. My name is Gaëlle Bastien. I'm a UDC law graduate from 2022. Today we're speaking on what I wish I had known as a 1L. And we're joined with DC Bar President Sadina.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. My name is Sadina Montani. I'm the president of the DC Bar, and I am a GW Law graduate from 2008.
So we're going to start off with the biggest question most 1Ls have is what was the biggest misconception you had about law school before starting your 1L year?
I would say the biggest misconception I had was that law school would be like college at the undergraduate level or in other ways. Law school is such a unique experience in that it teaches you how to think in a way that's very particular. And I remember realizing a few weeks into my 1L first semester that I had learned more practically about how to think than I really had during all of the years of college that I had going into law school. And I was in college for a while before law school because it took me a little bit to figure out what I wanted to do. I would say another big misconception that I had was that it would be, purely academic endeavor. I'm a first generation lawyer and a first generation college student. So I didn't know anything about law school aside from what I had read in books or had seen in movies. I didn't know anything about the job search process. I didn't even know there was a job search process when I started. And a story that I like to tell about my complete ignorance of law school and the business of law before I started law school is that I went to an introductory dinner the April before I started law school. I started at GW in the night program because I was working part-time at the university at the time. And so I started as a part-time night student, and they had a wonderful dinner for those of us who lived in DC already and who were starting the night program the following fall. It was a great dinner. I met a number of folks there that were close friends through law school and beyond. But I didn't even know what big law was when I started law school. And so at one point in the dinner, they were talking about how great GW law is, which it is great. And they also talked about basically what you could make as a first year lawyer, which sounds a little gauche, but it was very helpful for me because I had no idea. And they were really talking about big law. And they talked about what the starting salaries were for first years in big law. If you were in the top 10% of the class or the top 30% of the class, or the top 50% of the class, which really didn't really matter. If you got into big law, this was your starting salary. And I was flabbergasted. I remember pausing at an appropriate time after the speaker was sharing this information. I stepped away as though I was going to the restroom. I went outside of the building and I called my then fiance and I said, "You are not going to believe what they just said that first year lawyers make." And he was like, "That can't be right. That can't be right." And I was like, no, that's what they just said. So just to illustrate that I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I was clearly not going to law school because I wanted to be a big law lawyer. Here I am 20 years later, a big law lawyer. And hopefully that is somewhat reassuring for some of the new 1Ls who are not entirely sure what they're getting themselves into. It's okay that you don't know what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah, I completely agree. I didn't know anything about law school. I was the first one in my family to actually go to law school. So what I thought of law school was just like what I see in movies or on TV. Like everyone is very competitive. It's not like collegial. No one made friends. Like everyone's fighting with each other to get the highest grade. And that is not completely far from the truth, but that is not entirely true. Like I have some of the greatest connections, relationships from the people that I've met my 1L year that I'm still, granted I graduated in 2022, but I'm still friends with now. And I think that's a big misconception that people have or may have when they start their 1L year. Another one could be like knowing for certain what type of law you want to practice. Or like you're required to know what type of lawyer you want to be as soon as you get into law school. First year, it's already planned for you, but second and third year, that's when you kind of do different classes, figure out what you enjoy, you do clinic. So I think you don't necessarily, it'll be good, but you don't necessarily have to know exactly what you should do once you start your 1L year.
I agree with that. And I will just add that how you do in law school in certain classes does not necessarily align with whether you are going to be successful in that field. I will confess that my worst grade in law school was in employment law. I am an employment law partner in big law now. And I think if you had also told me when I was in law school that at this point in my career, I would still be in big law, or that I would be a partner in big law and I would be doing employer side management employment work, I would think that surely those loans had been paid off by now. And what was I doing? But there's a lot of misconceptions about the various practices of law, how meaningful and impactful they can be. I find my work to be very meaningful and very impactful. But I also got a B- in employment law, and I was mortified, and I thought I could never be an employment lawyer. Spoiler alert, that didn't align with what it turns out I was good at. So also don't be concerned if you get a grade in a class that you think, oh, I got a B in civil procedure. I thought I wanted to be a litigator. I have to completely change my trajectory. You do not. It's going to be okay.
It's very true. Going on, what study strategies actually worked for you in 1L and which ones didn't?
So I will confess that it has been 20 years since I started law school. Study strategies may look different now than they did 20 years ago, but I think some things are evergreen. And so what I would suggest is that generally trial and error is really important. Different people learn and retain information in different ways. And so one of the things that I was a little bit neurotic about, definitely as a first year and continued through the rest of law school, was figuring out a system to organize and review cases. And what worked for me was color-coded highlighting for different parts of the case. I would use one color, like green for facts and yellow for holdings, because I don't have a photographic memory. So I wanted to be able to very quickly identify in class if I got called on and I wasn't as prepared as I might want to be, or just, to be prepared in any event. I wanted to be able to quickly identify, okay, what if I'm being asked about the relevant facts in this case, where is that in my notes? And so I would sometimes use colored sticky notes. I would just try and spend a few minutes making sure that I, at the end of every class, also took notes about what the important parts of the cases were. And these are skills. Learning how to recite what's important in a case is not necessarily what the practice of law looks like, I will tell you. However, setting strategies for yourself and being diligent and really disciplined about knowing how you learn and retain information those are the skills you will carry with you. And so one of the other things I did that I found very useful was that I would set aside time at the after class or at the end of the day to jot down what was important from those classes so that I could, look at that paragraph going into the next week or as I was preparing for exams. I found that to be pretty useful too. And that's something that I do now in the practice of law. When I'm in a meeting, if I'm not taking notes in real time, someone else is, or it's just not that kind of meeting, I'll endeavor to make sure I have time at the end of the meeting or at the end of the day to get some notes down on what happened so that while it's fresh, I'm still connecting with what seemed most meaningful at the time.
Were you ever big outliner or flashcard user?
Oh, I love a good outline. I love a good flashcard. I also color coded my outlines. I was pretty neurotic. I found that to be very helpful. I don't recall using flashcards in law school. I'm sure I did. I will tell you, and you have a lot to cover before you get to this point. But I remember studying for the bar exam. I had a stack of flashcards that it was like a game of Jenga. That's how tall it was. And by the end of my bar prep, I had pretty much all of them down cold. That worked for me. It doesn't work for everyone. And so really, again, thinking about and using this time to build on what you know about yourself and how you learn
Mm-hmm.
and how you study and how you've been successful to this point, and really working to refine and retune that to the law school
Mm-hmm.
experience will also be helpful as you are taking those skills then into the practice of law.
Yeah, because I use the strategies that I use in undergrad and grad school because I outline almost everything. So I was like, that worked for me. Let me use outlines while I'm in law school. And it worked, but, and this doesn't apply to one else, but bar prep. I really like when you brought up the bar prep where you use flashcards. I never used flashcards in undergrad, grad school, law school. I didn't find any use for them. But I was like, I need to find something that's a little different, that's going to stick a little better. So I was like, let me try flashcards. And they actually were useful when it came to studying for the bar. So I think the biggest takeaway is truly trial and error, see what works, use that, and hopefully you're successful with that. I know in your previous answer, you talked about how you used to color code your highlights of the cases in case you're like cold called. Is there any other strategy you would use to kind of help you in these cold call situations?
So remember that everyone who is in the class with you is also in the same boat when it comes to getting cold called, right? And I would just say, as the general matter, everyone should be kind to each other, show one another some grace, and other people will show you grace. And that includes professors. I think it's a good idea to make sure you do what you can to figure out which professors are more aggressive with cold calling than others. I remember starting law school and people saying they don't really do cold calling anymore. That's out of style. And that was not my experience. And so that may be one of the things that is evergreen and still relevant 20 years after I was a 1L. Knowing which professors approach cold calling in which ways can be very helpful. Some of them go in alphabetical order, so you have a little bit of a heads up. Just know that your professor has seen it all, has seen people who come in having not read anything and try to make it up on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
I would say if you have not read a case, you should probably just say, I actually was unable to read this case. I'm very sorry. And just own it, because you will get caught and it will be embarrassing. And the same thing's going to happen when you're a practicing lawyer. You will make
Mm-hmm.
mistakes, you will be caught unprepared. And it is best just to say, if you are in that moment, I'm very sorry, I did not get to read this case. But setting yourself up for success, figuring out what's going to work for you to best prepare for it is really important. If you find that you're in a class where the professor cold calls, but is pretty nice about it, or doesn't really have a regimented process and it's hard to predict, sometimes asking a smart question in a class when you are prepared can help you a week or two later if either you get called on and you aren't prepared, or it may be that the professor will not call on you because you asked a smart question that demonstrated you knew what the case was about in real time.
Mm-hmm.
No one likes when it's clear that you are fabricating something just to hear yourself speak. That's not what I'm suggesting. But each class has its own, I think vibe is the official word, and each professor has their own approach. Figuring out what you can in advance so that you can prepare. Again, those are skills that will be helpful for you when you're practicing law as well. So do your homework for personalities and do your actual homework too.
Okay, that's a good point. I have a little story. I had this one torts professor, cold call only, but he would cold call on made up scenarios. So it was never an actual case, or I mean, the rules are pulled from cases, but it was like the scenario was completely made up. And he wouldn't move on to the next student until he felt like you had formed a concise opinion or able to make some type of point before he moved on to another student. How do you think students should approach that situation where there's no for real way to prepare, but it's like really on the fly?
That sounds both mortifying and
Yes.
also pretty helpful.
It was so helpful.
Because, look, it can be hard to remember or to have the perspective when you are a first year, or frankly, at any point in law school, that you are going to be a practicing lawyer more quickly than you realize, right? Before we started recording, Kyle, you and I were talking about our separate surprise at how long it's been since we've graduated law school. You were saying, I can't believe I graduated law school in 2022. I can't believe I graduated law school in 2008. I can't believe
Yes.
it's been 20 years since I started law school. It can be hard to really internalize that you're going to spend a lot more time as a lawyer than you are in law school. And
Mm-hmm.
so while that, again, does sound kind of mortifying to work through in real time, being able to formulate thoughts on the fly, to have the confidence in yourself that you sometimes are going to think out loud and work through those issues and get better at doing that, that's the kind of stuff that you're going to need to be able to do as a first, second, third, 20th year lawyer. And the more that you can practice and the earlier that you can get started practicing that, the better. So I would say acknowledge the nervousness that comes with being the person who is on the hot seat. Know that everyone else in the room is also nervous about being on the hot seat, and that you are getting, even though it's somewhat mortifying, actually good practical experience
Mm-hmm.
thinking through complex, novel legal issues. And that is exactly what you should be learning how to do when you're in law school, is think about those things.
Yes. I know in the beginning we talked about the relationships you make in law school. What advice would you give about building relationships with professors?
That's a really great question. And I think the advice I will give about building relationships with professors is pretty similar to the advice that I give about building relationships with colleagues or with mentors or with peers or with clients. Again, when you are actually out there practicing law, which is to just be yourself and to be genuine and to be comfortable with the fact that the person that you're speaking with is probably smarter than you are. It can be hard for some law students to recognize that even if they have the sheer intelligence that is, they could be a shining star, they could be brilliant, having the highest IQ in the world. The professor knows more than you do. And that's okay. And that's the way it should be, because you are presumably, or someone is paying a lot of money for you to go to law school. You have a
Mm-hmm.
lot to learn from them. And, I think being humble is important, but also being genuine and seeking to learn from that person is a skill that, again, will serve you well. When I am talking to clients, I approach it from a place of wanting to learn from them. I am a better lawyer if I know more about the organization that I'm working with and the people that I'm working with. And if I'm myself and if I'm genuine, when you're out there trying to find mentors, being yourself, being genuine, having a genuine curiosity and wanting to learn from the other person is much more likely to get you the attention of a mentor, of a client, and of a professor. And so
Mm-hmm.
when you are working to build relationships with professors, it sometimes can be transactional, but if you can avoid thinking about it in that way and really just approaching it with curiosity and wanting to learn from them and know that you have
Mm-hmm.
things to learn from them, and not trying to be someone you're not, I think that's the most successful way to build any genuine connection in any
Mm-hmm.
professional setting.
No, I agree. And even when you're in law school, professors typically have office hours. Students should utilize that. And then most office hours I went to, they're not only limited to what's discussed in class. Like you can go on and ask other questions about things you're interested in, because all the professors, I mean, that's their career, but they're not only professors. They've had lives, they've done different things. In most cases, they're open to share that information with you and then could steer you in whatever direction that you're looking to go in.
Absolutely. A lot of professors have practiced law, are still practicing law, have had vibrant practices. And even if their experience is purely academic, they have spent their career around a lot of lawyers who are
Mm-hmm.
doing a lot of interesting things. And in DC in particular, we have such a varied set of or ways to practice law that what lawyers do in this town. One of the things I'm finding so rewarding about being DC bar president is learning about all of the different things that are happening in the legal community And even though I've been deeply involved in the legal community for nearly 20 years now, I'm still learning a lot about what people do, how they're practicing law. Your law professors are also deeply plugged into what is happening in the profession. And a point not to lose track of with professors and in general is most lawyers like to hear themselves speak, and most lawyers like to give advice. And
Yeah,
so if you are genuinely asking for advice, you are probably not going to have to drag it out of whomever you're asking it from. Like
very
they
true.
they want to share their experiences. They want to share what they know, the connections they have, and you should feel very empowered to ask for that advice. I agree, not just about the case that you didn't understand from the
Hmm.
last class, but also what it means to be a lawyer and what you are feeling drawn to and what they think you would be good at.
Yeah, that's very true. We talked about you were so shocked of what first year associate or an associate would make as a new lawyer. So, what's one thing you wish you'd done differently or you think was a good idea during your 1L summer job search? Or, like, did you even get a 1L summer job?
Gaëlle, you did a wonderful job of realizing that you were making a factual assumption in the question that you were
Yeah.
asking me, weren't you?
Yes.
Yeah, so I actually didn't have a 1L summer job because I worked part-time at GW through law
Mm,
school. So I started in the night program part-time, and my 1L summer I was taking a bunch of classes to catch
mm,
up because then I transferred into the full-time program and graduated in 3 years. So I would say I am glad that I was able to continue working at GW while I was in law school. I do not regret that at all. You know, I would offer to folks that if you were in a situation where you don't have the luxury of being able to have a 1L summer job, that's okay. There are other ways that you can get some of those experiences by doing clinics and those types of things. And if you end up getting a placement that's not ideal, it's not exactly what you wanted to be doing, I would say don't sweat it. You're going to learn something from it. I am sure that I learned things from that, my part-time job, even during that summer, that were valuable in addition to the benefits of having had that part-time job. So it can be stressful, especially if you are new to the profession and that you don't come from a family of lawyers. There are lots of opportunities to be stressed out. I think your 1L summer is not one that you should be terribly stressed out about because there's lots of ways for you to start to get experience, even if it's just in clinics or in a job that is not exactly where you hoped you would be your 1L summer.
I completely agree. I think more so the 2L summer and well, there's no 3L summer, but I think 2L summer, I wouldn't say you need to be stressed, but where it's a little more, not necessary, but required that you kind of take a job in the direction of where you anticipate that you're going to go when you graduate from law school. I use my 1L as like a learning. I did a government internship. I was like, do I like government? Okay, I do. Learned it. I think that's, you use 1L summer just to learn where you fit in, where you like, and it's not, what is it, be all, what's the saying?
End all and be all.
Yes, end all and be all. If you don't get a summer job, or even if you're doing something that you don't like, what you mentioned earlier. I think this is going to be our last question. What's one piece of advice you'd give to someone starting law school with imposter syndrome?
We could probably do an entire podcast on the advice that I would give to 1L students who are starting law school with imposter syndrome. I remember when I was in my 2L summer position, or maybe it was when I was a first year lawyer. I can't quite recall because it's been a few years. But I got a piece of advice when I was either a law student or a very junior lawyer from a then probably pretty junior partner. From my vantage point, then he was a partner, and I thought that meant he knew everything. Now I look back and he probably was not a partner then, as long as I have been a partner now, which is kind of strange to think about. But the advice was this: everyone is making it up as they go. So just know that it may seem as though your colleagues or the folks who are a couple years ahead of you know what they're doing in a way that you do not, know that they're also making it up as they go, right? And that is okay, and give yourself some grace. I would also say find your people. And that can be through your section that you're in law school. I would also highly recommend, this is not just a shameless plug, it is a genuine plug, getting involved in the bar communities. I joined the Women's Bar Association of DC when I was still in law school. I don't know that we had a law student community at the DC bar when I was in law school. We have one now. It is a wonderful resource. Membership is, I think, $25, and you get lots of programming opportunities, and there's opportunities to get in contact with your peers at different law schools and to start to meet folks in the profession. I know there is a mixer coming up that's going to be at the DC bar. It's on September 9th, which I believe is after this podcast is coming out. It is on my calendar. I would be thrilled to talk to anyone who wants to come to that event and get more advice. It's a really great way to get involved in finding your people and finding the communities of people who are going to help you navigate your imposter syndrome, or at least acknowledge that they too are experiencing it, because everyone does from time to time, is incredibly, incredibly important. I also would just urge everyone not to forget that you wouldn't be in law school if you did not earn your seat. You are in law school because you have earned it. You deserve to be there. You are smart enough to be there. You are more than capable of succeeding, and you would not have gotten that seat if you weren't all of those things. And I think it's especially important for people who are either first generation lawyers, or like me, both first generation lawyer, first generation college students, to know that, you're in law school, not because someone has expected since you were in the fourth grade that you were going to law school, not because you grew up spending Saturdays in your parents' partner's office at some law firm downtown.
Mm-hmm.
You were there in spite of the fact that those were not your experiences, right? And so I would say that all the more reason it's clear that you have earned your spot in law school, and don't let anyone tell you that you have not earned that spot. Your hard work, your talent, your intellect is what has gotten you there. It's what will get you through law school, and it's what will make you a successful lawyer in whatever capacity you end up practicing law.
That was really good points made. I don't believe in imposter syndrome. If you think you're supposed to be there, you're supposed to be there.
You're supposed to be there.
So I did want to talk about two last points. The Let's Brief It podcast. The applications to that open September 2nd, and it's due October 3rd. And then the 7th annual Karen Hasty Williams Leadership Fellowship. The applications for that open September 15th, and they are due October 26th. So thank you for taking the time to speak on what 1Ls need to know to prepare. It was a great conversation.
It was great meeting you and speaking with you, Gaëlle. And I hope that we will get to see each other very soon at a DC Bar event. And I hope that folks listening will consider coming to the Back to Law School Mixer that we have coming up on September 9th.